Hi, everybody. Today's Friday, August 29th, 2025, and our friends, Colonel Wilkerson and Larry Johnson, are back with us. Welcome back.
I'm glad to be here.
Good to be with you, Neiman.
And look at Colonel Wilkerson and that incredible shirt. Man's a winner.
Just, yeah, he's just shining here.
By the way, you'd never believe where I got this. My shipment still didn't come in. I went down to the PX at Fort Myer.
Let me start, Colonel, with what Keith Kellogg yesterday posted on his X account. He says that last night Russia launched the second largest aerial attack of the war with 600 drones and 31 missiles. The targets, not soldiers and weapons, but residential areas in Kiev. What's your take on the latest attack on Kiev and the way that Keith Kellogg is talking about it?
I missed your opening. Was that to Larry or to me? Or
To you, Colonel.
Oh, okay. Well, to me, it's explicable only in the sense that Putin is serious about what he's doing, and he is continuing to do it. And he's expanding it perhaps a little bit where it'll hurt more than, hurt in terms of Zelensky and his support than just destroying the Ukrainian military on the battlefield, which is his principal purpose. So I can't crawl into Putin's head and see why he's doing things like that, but that would be my inclination.
Well, let me just jump in. One of the targets that were struck in Kiev was essentially the British described it as a diplomatic facility, but it was actually being used by British intelligence agents and officers to go after. To help the Ukrainians target Russia. So Russia is sending a message to the Brits. The Brits have really been the most antagonistic and insistent on continuing and expanding this war if possible. And so Russia's hitting back.
It's not just the British target. We had the Turkish Bayraktar plant that was hit, Larry. And what was that? What was that? Is Russia sending message to Germany?
No, well, Russia's sending message not just to Germany, but to Turkey. Across the board, the West has misinterpreted Russia's patience as weakness. That Russia has a plan. It's not trying to deviate from that plan. It's pressing forward with it. But consistently, you've got a number of entities that the West is trying to use to provoke Russia. And we saw that with Aliyev as well in Azerbaijan. And notice what Russia's response has been. They've blown up one of the largest oil terminals for Azerbaijan that was in Odessa. And they're stopping the import of produce, fruits, vegetables that Azerbaijan normally would sell into Russia. So, Russia is pushing back, all across the front. The concern right now is that NATO is doing a number of very either deliberate provocations or they're planning an operation because they've been flying ISR, the Poseidon 8A, the Rivet Joint, this KC-135 that's outfitted to collect all sorts of signals data. And there's a report out from Steve Bryan, who I know, a former Department of Defense official, claiming that, NATO's gearing up to conduct an attack on Crimea. So this, this thing is headed for escalation, not de-escalation.
Nima, you can read some of the firings that just took place, the most dramatic one being the unnamed lady at the CIA, as indicative of, and this is the way I prefer to read them. I don't know that I should read them this way, but I prefer to read them this way. Trump getting angry, Tulsi getting angry at some of what's going on still for the U.S. in support of Ukraine, and even more so, what has gone up to this point in support of Ukraine. I'd also put the firing of the DIA director in that category too. And one of the biggest things I think got them angry was the lying about the casualties. Lying are just terrible tradecraft. I mean, we're pretty sure now that the total casualties for the Russians are around 300K, maybe a little more than that. And for the Ukrainians, approaching 1.5, 1.6, maybe even 1.7 million. So there's been some really cooked intelligence or brain dead people or both.
Yeah.
Larry, does Russia feel that the only exit to what's going on in Ukraine is on the battlefield?
I don't know. I know that's what I think, simply from looking at it. There is, despite Donald Trump's opening to Vladimir Putin, Trump's still, some of his words, but more importantly, his actions. And one of those is like approving the deployment of 3,500 ERAM missiles. This enhanced distance missile that will can go 300 miles into Russia. Those aren't the acts of someone seeking to de-escalate or to disengage. So I think Russia's come to the conclusion that, or I would hope they've come to the conclusion, they've got no alternative but to defeat Ukraine and in the process defeat NATO on the battlefield, because the West is not going to stop. We got so many people here in the West that continue to operate under this belief that this is a conflict just between Ukraine and Russia over something, territory. And if we just get them to settle that, everything will be okay. The United States does not have a single interest in Russia being intact, Russia being whole, Russia being productive. The West wants to destroy Russia. We may not be out saying it overtly every day, but that's the plan. I can come to no other conclusion by watching what we've been doing. It's not just Trump. I think a lot of stuff happens that Trump's not even briefed on. And, he's just sort of catching up after the fact. But, when he said the other day that the Russian claims about they don't view Zelensky as a legitimate president, and he said that's bullshit, and they're just posturing, shows you he doesn't understand, because the Russians are not posturing. They're not great stage actors.
Colonel, how do you see this scale of it? Do you think that it's bigger, as Larry pointed out? I feel that way. What's your feeling on that?
I don't disagree with Larry, but I do think there is a current within Trump's electric brain that does want to stop this and stop it in a way that gives him more credit than discredit. And I think there are people arrayed around and behind Trump, and very powerful people. They were arrayed behind and with Biden as well, who don't want that to happen, just as Larry said.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, I think, and this has been some research I've done in the last week or so, congruent with another group I belong to, there are about 50 to 60 million dispensationalists in this country. We call them fundamentalists. And their interpretation of the Rus is that they are the soldiers of the Antichrist.
Mm-hmm.
And we discount these people at our peril. These people have captured a lot of the more important parts of our Congress, some of the executive branch, and a couple of people on the Supreme Court, in my considered view. And Opus Dei, for example, I think sees great interest. They don't necessarily agree religiously with these people. They have a different interpretation of the end times and the rapture and all the rest of that garbage. but they are allied with them, just as Trump is exploiting them, and people around Trump, like Stephen Miller and others, are deeply exploiting them. They are an integral part of their political power. And when you try to explain why a lot of Americans seem to have a vivid distaste for, even a hatred for Russians, I think you have to poke into that a little bit and see where it comes from. I wouldn't be surprised, for example, that some of Lindsey Graham's ire doesn't come from that. I know Ted Cruz's ire comes from that, because as we know from the interview with Tucker Carlson, Ted Cruz bases his security policy decisions on the Old Testament. And that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah, this demonization of Russia goes back probably 900 years or more.
Yeah.
With the and Vladimir Putin pointed this out, and I think he was absolutely correct, that the papal envoy went to Russia to try to persuade the ruler Ivan, that we know as Ivan the Terrible, to persuade Ivan to become join the Catholic faith. And he refused. He says, we are Orthodox Christians. Now, the biggest difference between Orthodox Christianity and Catholicism is the Catholicism's like a rigid pyramid. Got a pope at the top. It's got this entire structure below it. It's very much a hierarchical, authoritarian system. The irony is that the Orthodox Christian Church is nothing of the sort. They will acknowledge certain people as having great power as a spiritual leader, but they're not a hierarchy at all. They're actually much more democratic, and so that plays a part into this. And again, just the fact that you've got this Schofield Bible nonsense that will portray Russia as the Antichrist, when compared to countries, if you did a survey of countries in the world with which countries have the most professing Christians, which countries have the most Christians attending religious services, Russia would be in the top. that surpassed the United States. And so, but yeah, we got to hate them because they're against God. And then you step back and say, which country in the world has spent more time killing people in other countries over the last 30 years in violation of the commandment, thou shalt not kill? Oh, that us, the United States. So yeah, this entire propaganda thing is just completely turned around to convince Americans that of an evil where they refuse to look in the mirror and see it in themselves.
Colonel, what's going on in Ukraine? It seems that it's more than the problem, the local problem between Russia and Ukraine. Because when you look at the extent at which the US and Europeans are somehow escalating the situation there, it doesn't seem that simple, because it's not just about sacrificing Germany and all Europe. They're going after India. They're going after Brazil. And here is what Lindsey Graham posted yesterday: India, China, Brazil, and other who prop up Putin's war machine by buying cheap Russian oil. You know, these people, it's not just about Lindsey Graham. Here is what the White House trade advisor, the Peter Navarro said.
Yeah.
Talks with India right now. Is there a potential for a deal to change that number?
Look, it's real easy. India can get 25% off tomorrow if it stops buying Russian oil and helping to feed the war machine.
Not sending that signal?
They're not. And look, here's the thing. I'm puzzled, okay? Because Modi's a great leader. These people this is a mature democracy with intelligent people running it. And they look us bald-faced in the eye on the tariff part and say, we don't have the highest tariffs in the world, when in fact they do. There's no dispute about that if you look at the numbers. And then they say, we're not going to stop buying Russian oil. Now, what does that mean? I mean, we've talked about this, but it's worth talking to your viewers again. When India buys Russian oil at a discount, and then Indian refiners in partnership in India with Russian refiners make that and sell it at a premium to the rest of the world, right? Russia uses the money it gets to fund its war machine, kill more Ukrainians, and then the next thing that happens, of course, is Ukraine comes to us and Europe and says, give us some more money. So everybody in America loses because of what India is doing. The consumers and businesses and everything lose, and workers lose because India's high tariffs cost us jobs and factories and income and higher wages. And then the taxpayers lose because we got to fund Modi's war, okay? The road to peace runs at least partly right through New Delhi.
War?
I mean Modi's war.
Let me ask
because
you
the
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's not anymore Putin's war, it's Modi's war.
Yeah. This guy's really smoking some cheap stuff, Nima. I mean, I could take his words and go and tell you about Glencore and what they did to rape, pillage, and plunder the Levant oil system, pipelines, Turkish pipelines, Kurdish pipelines, Syrian pipelines, and so forth, to do precisely what he's accusing India and Russia in combination of doing, and making a fortune out of it. And I got to tell you about a lawyer named Scooter Libby, who in 1 year working for Mark Rich, a criminal, and this organization as his lawyer, made $4.5 million US. The chief of staff to Secretary of State of Defense, Dick Cheney, and then Vice President Dick Cheney, really President Dick Cheney from 2001 to 2005. I mean, that's what he's describing, and we're doing that right now, still without Mark Rich around. God bless his soul. He died. Clinton pardoned him as a last heinous act because Clinton knew he'd been elected because of AIPAC, and Mark Rich was working for the Israelis. They got discounted oil the way he's describing right now with our perfect blessing for 20 freaking years, starting when Netanyahu was finance minister. So that's just disingenuous bull he's talking about. Not only that, and we're the guilty party really big time in doing that for the past 20 plus years. He's lying in the sense that he's motivated, he's got into Modi's head and saying what he's motivated by. Modi's motivated by one thing, really, and that is he has a fairly decent relationship with Russia, and he can get oil from Russia, and that's a good source, and he's going to continue to do it for as long as he needs oil, which is for quite a while to come. I mean, this guy, just listening to him kind of makes me ill.
Yeah.
Because he acts like he's giving us a revelation, both economic, petroleum-wise, India-wise, Russia-wise. He's giving us a revelation. He's not giving us any revelation. Let me sit you down and tell you about what Mark Rich did and what we're still doing. And guess what Turkey's doing with this Cheyenne pipeline, allowing them to ship this oil to Israel. Erdogan comes on and rails about the Palestinians and then ships hundreds of millions of barrels of oil to the people doing it. That's the world we live in. Sorry, Mr. Navarro. Did you just enter it?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Larry.
I just Navarro's comments elicit nothing but outrage and fury on my part, because the one country that's the biggest enabler of the war in Ukraine is the United States. The one who's been provoking it for 30 years is the United States. The ones who's sending billions of dollars in weapons directly to Ukraine has been the United States. Donald Trump refuses even to acknowledge his own role in this during his first term in sending lethal equipment to Ukraine in preparation for this war that got launched in February of 2022. So, I mean, if Navarro is so stupid And again, he's providing advice to Trump, and Trump reportedly is listening to him, which explains quite a bit of why we're in the mess we are. The Indians are not backing down. They are, in fact, it has had the opposite effect. Instead of forcing India to go, oh my God, we can't do this, we're going to have to surrender to the Americans, they're basically saying, why do we need the Americans anymore? Why should we even deal with them? And Modi has refused at least 4 phone calls. I've heard the number 5 from Trump. Trump keeps trying to call him, hey, buddy. Modi's not picking up. Modi is now in China. He's meeting with Xi. He's meeting with Putin. And he's actually going to be meeting as well with the Iranian president, Pezeshkian. So what we see forming is a more solidified global South bloc that is going to be impervious to U.S. pressure. And that's just going to drive Trump and his cronies out of their minds, because they keep pretending that they're the big dog in the middle of the street and everybody's got to do what they say. And everyone said, no, we'll just block off the street and leave you alone. You know, you can sit out there and play with yourself. We're going in a different direction.
And Nima, the group on the other side of this massive, inexorable power shift that is happening globally, comprised principally of China and Russia, but now India and increasingly other BRICS countries, is got to make a decision. And I think they're in the process of making that decision. Do they just continue to deal with the power that has gone absolutely nuts about preventing this shit to come out? Or do they really stand up and be noticed in opposing it? And I don't mean necessarily militarily, because I know the principal power there, China, does not want a war, period.
Right.
They're winning. Why should they want a war? It's kind of like the reverse of Putin. But they're winning in this shift, and it's inevitable that it's going to take place. But there's so many people that don't want it to take place. I suspect Peter Navarro is one of them. And they're using Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, Romania, you name it. You know, Donahue wanted to use Kaliningrad. We're using all of this stuff, soon to be the Arctic, maybe soon to be a renewed war in Iran, all of this stuff to arrest this movement. And they're going to get wise to it to the point that they understand we will not give up. And then they're going to have to be doing things like India is doing, like Brazil is probably going to do, even more so, and like other countries in the world are going to do, solidifying their power behind this shift and working on everything from a new monetary system to a whole new international system. And we're going to wake up one morning and we're going to be the only party out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we're falling so far behind, especially with regards to both China and Russia, what is taking place in those societies. China really is the most, and India, I would say, is falling in behind, but India hasn't begun to catch up to China in terms of the transformation of society. If you go back 30, 40 years in China, you didn't have these gleaming, magnificent cities that now extend across the entire landscape of China. You didn't have these high-speed rails in place and operating, which they are now. And China is not content to stay at home and just enjoy its own wealth and celebrate its own accomplishments. They're right now in the process of helping Brazil and Peru, and maybe I think Bolivia might be involved, but they're going to have a trans-South America railroad, just like we had the transcontinental railroad in the United States. It was built in the 1860s. This one now, they're going to be, going through the jungles of Brazil and the Amazon rainforest. But if once that's created, all of a sudden you've introduced something very new into the world. And the United States continues to pretend that China is just like a fake economy and a fake government, that it's teetering, that just any minute now it's going to collapse. And this kind of self-delusion is going to get us into trouble. And so is what Colonel Wilkerson was pointing out, that the train has left the station and we're still sitting there looking the wrong way down the tracks, waiting for the train to come. And we're not winning friends. There's nothing in Trump's policy that's got other countries clamoring to say, "Oh man, let's stand with the United States. Boy, they are the best, the brightest, they're the city on the hill." You're not getting any of that. People are saying, "Hey, we're not going to, we'll stop trading with you. We're going to go with these guys." BRICS is surpassing the G7 countries, and they're refusing to acknowledge it.
Carl, I think when we look at Ukraine, the big question is, what's in Ukraine that they're not giving up on Ukraine? Because look at what do they have in Ukraine to somehow save that? There is no army in Ukraine. There is no society. The economy is destroyed. Nothing else you can find to save it. You have to find some sort of solution for that. Or you go the other direction. You attack India, Brazil, China, with tariffs, with whatever you have geopolitically to attack them. So you have two sort of mindset. Why do they need to go against these big, somehow superpowers in order to save something in Ukraine that doesn't exist?
You're talking about something that, in my estimation anyway, and I felt this way all along, is insignificant to the bigger shift that I'm talking about that's taking place, except that it is a demonstrative point in the opposition to that shift right now, as Iran might be very shortly. If you read Anatole Lieven's piece yesterday, the day before yesterday, I guess, pretty damn good piece, saying the state of Britain, France, and Germany, economically speaking, and to a certain extent, politically speaking. What I've been saying all along, the governments are going to change. They're going to change slowly. They're going to change in accordance with their really anachronistic liberal democratic systems. They're terrible, especially in Germany. They don't get leaders that represent the majority of their people, period. Well, that's going to change. And the economic situation is becoming more dire every day that goes by. There is no way Macron can meet his commitment to raise his expenditures for NATO. There is no way that Germany can do it. And there's certainly no way that Britain can do it. So all of this right now is just a chimera, or a chimera, someone told me the other day. Chimera, the way you pronounce that word.
Yeah.
So how do you get out of this if you're Donald Trump? And I think that's the key question. I don't think personally he's equipped to do it, but I can hope. But that's the key question. How do you get yourself out of this central mess and not leave the Europeans falling apart, which they already are, economically in particular, and maintain the transatlantic link and keep some kind of buttress up, not so you can militarily or sanctions-wise or both. And by the way, the E3 might be getting ready to use snapback sanctions on Iran. Wait and see what happens if they do that. These people are just broken. They're broken, all of them, but principally Britain, France, and Germany. How do you get yourself out of that and return to some reasonable foreign and security policy that will accommodate this shift that's happening and not cause the world to really gang up on you and destroy you ultimately? In every aspect of power, ultimately destroy you and push you to the point where you have to rely on the only thing you have left in your arsenal, which is the thing that frightens me, nuclear weapons. And that's where we're headed. That's where we're headed. And Ukraine is just a little fly in that mess, really. It's much bigger than that. It's huge. It's global. And it's our peril and our dismissal from the world as a meaningful power. And yet we're just playing these little proxy games that will only exacerbate that. That's not what we should be doing. That's not what we should be doing. We should be shutting down all of these military. We just, you probably know this, but we just struck a fairly extensive series of airstrikes in Somalia. What the hell are we doing there? What is the military doing in Africa, still trying to hang on to African command, still trying to find a meaning to exist in the world, when all the rest of this stuff is happening that is certainly existential for us? And we're paying no attention to it. We're just doing things normally, doing things that the papers tell us we ought to do, that the media tells us we ought to do. This isn't the way to run an empire in any way, fashion, or form, unless you want to run it into the ground, speedily into the ground. Yeah. And that's what we're doing. Ukraine is just an example of that. Hard enough to get out of if you're not really intent on getting out of it. If you were really intent on, look, go back and look. I wish you'd play the video. What Trump said: I'll be done with this in 24 hours. I know Putin. I'll be done with this in 24 hours. I'm sorry, Mr. President. Do you ever live up to your promises? Do you ever live up to your expectations? There is a way to do it. And the way to do it is to recognize reality, stuff that reality down Macron and Starmer and Mertz's throat, let them wallow in their death struggle. That's what it's going to be. They're not going to really do anything to mess Russia up in Ukraine, not ultimately. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about continuing something that is absolutely insane for us to continue. We had a president who was elected partly on the fact he said he would shut it all down, and he hasn't done it. Shame on you, Donald Trump, because you could if you really wanted to. And particularly elevate it to the point where you just look over the mess and say, Moscow, we need to do New START. We need to renew it. We need to bring Xi Jinping in. And if a new security architecture for Europe is developed, we'll be right there to push, to help. But in the meantime, we're doing important things. That's what they should have said in Alaska. That's what they should have said in Alaska. Yeah. This is menial. I know it's killing your soldiers, Mr. Putin, and you need to get it stopped, and I need to get it stopped too. But we have better things to do, more important things to do. So let's get it stopped. And if it's on your terms, I'm a big enough man to let it be on your terms. And if you need Zelensky gone, we'll get Zelensky gone. I've got a feeling that I just got a feeling in my bones that Tulsi fired a bunch of these people because they were responsible for Ukraine.
Larry, Colonel said that Donald Trump, before coming to power, even in the initial days of his administration, he said that in 24 hours he has a good relationship with Putin, all of that. But here is what he said, the latest comment on his part.
Is they didn't pay the 2 and they paid the 5. So, and as you know, we are selling a tremendous amount of equipment to NATO. We're not spending any money, we're making money, but I don't want to talk about making. I want to talk about we're no longer involved with funding Ukraine, but we are involved with trying to stop the war and the killing in Ukraine. So we're selling missiles and military equipment, millions and millions, and ultimately billions of dollars to the NATO people, where I'm very friendly and we have a great relationship, but that was an amazing trip. So they're funding the entire war. We're not funding anything. I think it's an important point to make because a lot of people don't understand that.
They may get that equipment if that's true. They may get that equipment 5 to 7 years from now because we ain't got it.
Yeah, Trump doesn't understand the concept, or maybe he does understand it, he's just a cynical liar, of being an enabler, a facilitator. Just because you're no longer directly selling weapons to the Bloods and the Crips, that instead you use a cutout, that doesn't make you any less responsible for what's happening. And to couch this again as a money-making enterprise is just laughable, because the fiscal reality for the United States is that and I heard this number yesterday. I'm not sure it's true. I'd have to go back and check. But during Ronald Reagan's first term, 43 years ago, the U.S. debt was $1 trillion. Well, today it's 35 trillion and climbing, and it's climbing more rapidly with each passing day. So, there comes a point that the United States is no longer able to financially, economically sustain any support for Ukraine. But, it comes back to this broader question of what is it the United States is trying to do? Are we really trying to stop wars around the world? Or are we using a variety of excuses to start combat operations because it helps our economy, at least a segment of our economy? Well, here's Trump sending a Marine amphibious force towards Venezuela with a flotilla of Navy ships. At least he didn't deploy an aircraft carrier yet. So, you're doing that. You're threatening China. As Larry pointed out, you're conducting military bombing campaigns, and now in Somalia. So across the board, I guess I'm more and more convinced Trump's not really in charge. Trump gets to be brought out from time to time to do some message signaling, but there's something broader, deeper, and darker that's driving U.S. policy across the board. I mean, that peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia was just a case in point. That didn't originate with Trump. That came out of CIA. And when CIA is moving in something like that, again, it's not for building peace and prosperity in the world.
Yeah, I know why we're focused on Venezuela, and it isn't Donald Trump. It's Charles Koch. Charles Koch wants that oil. He built billions of dollars worth of refining capacity that only is good if he gets either that oil from Russia, and he ain't about to get that, it's heavy sulfur, or he gets it from Venezuela. And Hugo Chavez was good enough to give Charles a contract. Mm-hmm. And so his factories, his refineries were running. I think they're in Oklahoma and Texas. But Maduro won't give him a contract. He's refused to give him any oil. So Charles Koch, one of the richest men in the world, one of the most powerful men in the world because of the organization he's created in every state in the Union, every state, Charles Koch has an organization. He built an apparatus to capture 28 legislatures. One of the reasons the Republicans have a majority in the state legislatures is Charles Koch. Read Nancy McPherson's book, Democracy in Chains. She tells you all about this. And that's why we're doing that. But Larry's right. I looked at this flotilla, this MU minus, Marine Expeditionary Unit minus.
Yeah.
And what the hell is a nuclear-powered attack submarine doing with them? Are they going to shoot torpedoes at the cartel leaders? Are they going to shoot ballistic missiles? What are they going to shoot at them? I think, I got to looking at it and I said, well, they're going to feint against Venezuela and they're going to run up to Veracruz and they're going to do something in conjunction with, I would hope, the president, that might be effective against the really dangerous cartels. But that would give them credit for brains. I don't know. This makes no sense at all. And 2,200 Marines, be the Bay of Pigs with a little bit better result, maybe, but not much better.
Yeah. Bay of Pigs with better air cover, but trying
There's
to
no
get
air cover.
I know. trying to get a Marine force up the road from the coast where the airport is up to Caracas. They could eventually get there, but they would take enormous casualties.
Maybe the air cover is going to be the vaunted V-Stall F-35 and maybe some Ospreys that maybe they'll make it the way without crashing. I don't know what they're doing. As a military professional, I couldn't tell you what they're doing.
Yeah. Unless they're just doing this in order to demonstrate they need more budget for next year.
Yeah.
Say, this is, if we had to carry out this mission, we're sort of short of this, so you got to give us more money. It could be something as cynical as that.
And we could make the comment, I think it would be a cogent comment, that there isn't an aircraft carrier there because we don't have one to put there.
True.
Maduro said our diplomacy is a diplomacy of dignity. You cannot force us into anything. And do you feel, Colonel, how important is at this particular moment Venezuela? And this sort of move is somehow they're trying to intimidate Venezuela, or they really want to do something?
Well, as I said, I think it's all about oil. I think that's what it really is all about.
I'm talking about the government mostly. My focus,
you mean
the
Maduro?
government of Maduro.
Well, it's kind of like it was, a little bit different, and I was there when all this happened, but it's evolved to the point where it's a Noriega type deal, and they're using that as the case study, and they're using it very inexpertly and stupidly, in my view. Here's this guy. Okay, let's brand him as a drug lord. Let's brand him as someone who is inimical to our national security interests. Got to do that. And then let's do what we can to take him out, to include put a $50 million bonus on his head, hoping that some poor Colombian or whatever will go in there and take him out for the reward. I think it's a bad model to be using, but I think that's what it boils down to. But ultimately what we want is the oil, and all Maduro has to say is send your boys in and I'll sign a contract. And we would go away. There would be no problem after that. We might have some propaganda we throw out there, but there wouldn't be any real interest in the gangs, the terrorists, and all the rest of the people that Maduro is supposed to be in charge of. And as I understand it from my contacts, has probably much less to do with any of than, say, Noriega did, certainly, or even Colombia does. So take your pick of the reasons we're doing it. I think Larry's just as close to it as anything. We're doing it because we can.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's such a stupid policy. The best way, if your real goal is to defeat Maduro, make him irrelevant, ignore him. Don't treat him like he's a serious person. Instead, in doing this, it elevates Maduro's stature, not only within Venezuela, but throughout Central and South America.
Yeah, you've even got opposition leaders now coming out saying that we should back off, except for Juan Guaido, of course.
Well, and you've had, there have been tensions between Colombia and Venezuela in the past, except now Colombia is saying, hey, they're moving their soldiers to the border of Venezuela as well. It is a show of support for Venezuela. So this has the potential to really, again, damage the United States in a way that will make it difficult for us to operate in that region, despite we claiming it as our territory under the Monroe Doctrine. It's a ridiculous charge anyway to portray him as some great narcotics kingpin. I mean, the cocaine's produced and processed in Bolivia and in Colombia. Has Venezuela been used as a transit point for some movement shipments? Sure. Has it been a money laundering haven? I mean, look, when we did this tobacco case against Philip Morris, we collected documentary evidence of Philip Morris executives flying into Venezuela, into a place called Barquisimeto. They would rent an armored vehicle. They'd drive to the border. They'd pay off the border guards, both the Colombians and the Venezuelans. And they went into a city called Maicao, which is a smuggling center for Colombia. And they met with a state senator by the name of Santander López Sierra, Well, Lopez Sierra, he's a Saluki. He's a graduate of Southern Illinois University, okay? But he was also known in Colombia as the Marlboro Man because he was the main distributor for Philip Morris cigarettes, except, and they actually filmed the Marlboro Man commercials with him on a horse. But in the United States, when it was done, it was a rugged guy, tall, lean. This guy is a watermelon with feet, okay? Yeah, he roly-poly, but he had been responsible for killing at least 24 people. And so these Philip Morris executives went to his home, met with him, picked up bags of cash, third-party checks, and postal money orders, drove it back across the border into Venezuela, flew out of Venezuela, and the money was deposited in Russian banks. And I've got the bank records, here about 4 feet from me. My point in this is just to illustrate, that's how the real world works in this world of narcotics and corruption. Now, does that mean that, was it Hugo Chavez at the time that was allowing this? All I can tell you is Philip Morris, a U.S. corporation, or at least one that's seen as having started in the United States, heavily involved with the narcotics trafficking by virtue of funneling the money, taking care of the money. That's where we should be attacking. We attack that, we shut down the drug activity. But, oh no, the problem is Philip Morris makes campaign contributions to Republicans and Democrats, therefore can't touch that. So we go after Maduro. Here's what Maduro ought to do. He ought to start donating to both Republican and Democratic congressional candidates, and then he'd be home free. We'll let him do whatever.
Nima, I could throw some stuff in there about Plan Colombia when we gave $750 million to Colombia when I was in the government, and I won't, but similar stuff to what Larry was just saying. I would be willing to wager half of that money went into pockets, not to fight drugs.
Wow. Colonel, Medvedev said that Russia will take retaliatory measures if Austria joins NATO. Looking at Europe today, Colonel, Finland, Sweden, they had a very important position before the war started. And we had Switzerland losing their sort of unique position. And right now they're talking about Austria. This is the last, I would say, the last part of this puzzle, the last part of this picture to be totally destroyed if they go in that direction. What is positive in the eyes of, when Russia looks at Europe, what's positive to think of in your opinion?
Well, all of this, as I said before, all of this was a grand design that, at least, I don't think it commenced with George W. Bush. I think it commenced probably with Bill Clinton. But when it got to George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, it became a very coherent intelligence operation that used the new methodology, which was essentially don't do direct action anymore with CIA or paramilitary. You do what you do through NGOs, and you do it through U.S. aid, and you do it through IRI and NDI and other people like that. And what we did was we went very methodically through Europe, buying future Secretary Generals of NATO, starting with Stoltenberg, and buying governments. And they weren't necessarily elected by a majority of their people, because we did a very sophisticated study of the processes in each of the countries, like we did, for example, in Ohio and California and other places for our own election processes. Don't know the CIA was involved in that, but I would suspect they were.
Yeah.
And we bought these governments. We bought newspaper editors. We bought magazine editors. We bought artists. We bought culturalists. We bought people who were influential in those societies, and we wanted them to change, in some respects, the Scandinavians, for example, years of policy for neutrality. We wanted them to be members of NATO. I think that one of the reasons, it's probably not anywhere near the primary. But one of the reasons we stick to Ukraine, particularly the intelligence communities, is because what that did was cement the propaganda we were putting out about the threat. And Putin fell right into that trap. He mounted the special military operation, which we provoked him into doing for 10 freaking years at least. We provoked him into doing that. And that was the sort of, that was the cap on the prize. Didn't we tell you? Didn't we tell you? The Cold War's not over. It's just a different figure over there in Moscow. There's still a threat, even a worse threat. So come to NATO. And it worked. It worked. We got people that you would never, in 1992 and 3, when we were talking to the Russians seriously about their being a member of the political organization and ultimately the military alliance, when we were talking, we wouldn't have dreamed that someone would try to convince the European countries that were not NATO members to suddenly become NATO members or over time become NATO members. To include, as you said, I think our design was the entire complex. Everyone who had come out of the Iron Curtain, if you will, from out behind the Iron Curtain, everyone that was a former Warsaw Pact member or even a reasonable facsimile thereof, we were going to buy away politically and put them in NATO.
Yeah, we've used the end of World War II we've created a narrative based upon what the Soviet Union did at the end of World War II to brainwash the West into believing that the communist Soviet empire was intent on world domination and conquering the world. That was the reason that Stalin took control of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Hungary, because this was their plan to subvert the world. When in fact, the real reason was to create a buffer, because World War II represented at least the third time Russia had been invaded from the West since the 1812. So
don't forget Prince Nevsky before that even.
Yeah. So look at and this is relevant to Austria. Russia was they occupied Austria, Vienna, but they left Vienna because Austria negotiated and agreed to neutrality, that it wouldn't join NATO, it wouldn't join the Eastern Bloc with the Soviets, it would remain neutral. And what did those dastardly commie Soviets do? They left the country. They upheld the bargain. They abided by the terms of that agreement. Now, jump ahead, because that was 70 years ago. Austria is now talking about breaking that agreement. Well, even though it was negotiated in Stalin's time, the Russians still today look at that agreement and, this is not to be broken. Or it is typical of the West, always talking about a rules-based international order, but they break those rules whenever it's convenient for them. And, whether it's sponsoring terrorism, taking someone like Mohammed al-Jilani, transferring him into power as a president, changing his name, putting him in a suit, shaving his beard, getting a haircut, and pretending that he's not a guy that was out encouraging his followers to behead people and to kill Christians, to kill Alawites, to kill Shia. So, and the United States is quite complicit in that. So what's going on here with, if Austria does that, again, it's going to be one more example of that you can't trust any agreement the West makes. The West is not interested in actually settling the conflict, having peace. We want to take and destroy Russia so that we can get all of Russia's natural resources, and the people be damned. Same for Ukraine. They are a convenient pawn in a deadly game of chess right now. And the good news is the West is losing.
You know, Neiman, that's one of the most despicable things about both the Gaza conflict, which is so blatantly this way, but also Ukraine. We don't give a shit, just like Larry said. We do not care about these people.
Yeah.
We don't care about the Palestinians. We don't care about the Yugoslavians or the Ukrainians. I was just thinking about Yugoslavia as Larry was talking. If Yugoslavia were still there, we'd have an impediment to all this.
Yeah. And instead we're trying to provoke a war there. Look, this is, go back into American history, into the 19th century. And I forget the name of this U.S. Army colonel. He was also an itinerant preacher. But when I think it was the Sand Creek Massacre, where they massacred Native Americans, and he was killing the women and children, and he became famous for saying, "Nits make lice." And so, you know, this killing of the dehumanization of these, quote, savages, it's unfortunately something that's been a part of American culture for way too long. And maybe it was a legacy out of Europe, primarily out of Britain, because, you know, the British have engaged in similar evil conduct in places in their empire around the world, including in India and in China.
Colonel, people who are
no one was able to look down on people like the British.
Yeah.
I mean, we're terrible. We learned it at their feet.
Yeah.
But and India was horrible in that regard. They were peasants who were their slaves in most cases.
Colonel, for those people who still believe that Europe can save itself from what's going on, they're thinking of the former Austro-Hungarian states together with Serbia. They may do something about it. They may change the tone in Europe. Do you see that coming?
Well, I think there is a possibility of some relationships that we don't see now forming as this gets worse and worse in terms of, I recommend that article by Levin to you. I had no idea that Macron, for example, was in the deep trouble he's in. I had an intimation of it, but not the specifics that Anatole provides. And also Merz and Starmer, of course, we all know about his dilemma. I mean, he couldn't get elected dog catcher if he had an election right now. So there are realignments coming, I think, and they might not be healthy. When you look at, there's a hint in the article too about the prominence of the AfD in Germany now, and that prominence is happening, and we don't know if it's really happening at the what you might call the extreme right edge of it, or in the center, or wherever, but it's happening at the expense of the current coalition. That power is not only eking out of the current coalition; it's predominantly going to the AfD. All of these things are going to cause some significant realignments, I think, and all we're doing is playing with fire.
Yeah. Larry, what's going on with Iran is the case of snapback sanctions. And Iran is talking about leaving NPT.
Yeah.
They're not going to be part of NPT. What's so amazing to me that at the same time they're putting pressure on Iran, India, Russia, China. They're going to be at the SCO summit.
Correct.
And they're going to talk to each other. With the case of Iran, where are we headed?
Well, I think we're going back to the West wants to go back to war with Iran, and again they're treading on some very shaky ground in terms of their assumptions about Iran's capability. They're still, and I could point you to a number of analysts here in the West that believe that Iran is just one big shove from the West from having a collapsed regime. That the Ayatollah can no longer hold on to power, that the water shortage is that Iran's not going to survive. Well, Iran woke up after June 22nd. The 12-day war was a wake-up call to the Iranian people that So actually, it was, June. Let's say June 25th was when they really sort of said, "Okay, we have to change." Previously, Iran had they had welcomed support from Russia and China, but they didn't accept the kind of military integration with Russia and China that both countries were offering. Well, Iran's now accepting those, it appears. Iran correctly is, I was interviewed on Press TV the other night, and I said, hey, I know the Ayatollah's not asking my advice, but, if I was you guys, I'd kick the IAEA out now and have nothing more to do with the international organization, because it was only used to spy on you, to collect information so they could go kill your scientists. Yep. This is not a benign international institution. This is simply a tool of the intelligence agencies, and it's being used for very nefarious purposes. It'd be one thing that after, the 10 years ago, after signing the JCPOA, Iran was abiding by the terms completely, and despite abiding by the terms, the sanctions were never lifted by Europe. They never lifted the sanctions. They continued to find an excuse. So again, this goes back. These kinds of agreements are simply a trick, a ruse that the West is using to constantly bamboozle these foreign governments, whether it's Iran or Russia or China, that, like, well, we'll negotiate Minsk too. And then, as Merkel said, we had no intention of abiding by that. That was just to buy us some time so we could get Ukraine armed and equipped to kick the shit out of Russia. What? And here, Putin naively, and then this is a criticism of Putin, I thought he was shrewder than that, but man, he got taken for a ride on that deal. Now, I think he's realized that now and is not about to get taken again. But the same applies to Iran. The West continues to perpetuate the lie that Iran is the major destabilizing force in the Middle East. But it's not Iran that's bombing Lebanon, bombing Syria, bombing Yemen. That's Israel. Israel doesn't just stay at home. It goes out and it kills people repeatedly in other countries. They claim that Iran's responsible for, the deaths at the hand by terrorists that it supports. Nonsense. The numbers just simply don't support that. Israel, again, has got far more blood on its hands. The killer, the destabilizer, the terrorist is the state of Israel, in my view.
Absolutely.
So this is, that internet acronym, FA, FO, find out. I guess the clean version is fool around, find out. That if Israel decides to try to attack Iran again, I think we could very well be witnessing the end of the Israeli state, because Iran is in a position to deliver a defeat on Israel that Israel cannot recover from, even with U.S. help, or runs the risk of trying to use a nuke. But again, use a nuke and kill a bunch of Iranians, and all you're going to do is ensure that at that point the BRICS nations will stand up together. They'll stop it. This cannot be allowed to get out of hand in this way. But we are in perilous times, and I don't see it getting any better. And Donald Trump, instead of being an agent of peace, is an agent of war.
Carl.
Nope, I can't put it any better than that. If I were the Iranians, as I've said several times now, I would be building a bomb. And I would do it as rapidly as I could. I'd go on 24-hour shifts and I'd build a bomb. And I'd present it as a fait accompli in whatever way I could. Computer simulation now is almost as good as testing. But if you want to test, the North Koreans taught them how to go deep and to test. And the North Koreans proved you could go deep and test. And even the great Satan, the United States, would not know it. that makes the situation even more dangerous. And as Larry said, I wouldn't put it past Netanyahu at all if he gets in some real dire straits to at least threaten, if not to use, a nuclear weapon. And then, as Larry said, also the wraps are off. Then, holy mackerel, we're into a new world.
Colonel, how could you imagine that they can, by this sort of pressure, they can achieve something with Iran? Because what is the main reason of this snapback sanction, all these pressures? I would argue that there is nothing to come out of this sort of pressure. They're not going to work. Iran is prepared to talk. They never said that they're not going to talk. They're prepared. Each and every time they're repeating that.
Well, if they have made up their minds, and when I say they, I mean Netanyahu is the lead agent, of course, but nonetheless us right behind him. And the Europeans, like the vassal states they're pretending or actually are with us and even doing provocative things to aid and facilitate what we want to do, then they're all in this together. They all want a war. Now, yesterday I heard that the E3, the people who were very much apparent, if you will, during the JCPOA process, including Germany, Britain, France, and Germany, and others in Europe were having second thoughts about going rapidly into implementing the snapback sanctions and what that might mean. I don't know if that's the case or not. It would be a wise thing to be talking about, I think. But if they are going to go in concert with us and build the momentum for this war and give Netanyahu his excuse to do it, because as you said, the Iranians are going to do some things when this happens, probably most visible of which will be leaving the non-proliferation treaty, then, we're off to the races. Treat a party's right. We're going to war.
Larry, the case of Gaza, and Israel attacked a hospital in Gaza, and then they attacked it again to kill journalists.
Mhm.
And here is what the Israeli government spokesman said about the journalists.
Noble profession. But many journalists who have reported from Gaza, so-called journalists, are simply terrorists with a press vest on.
Who are these terrorists? Do we have any sort of evidence, document, anything that proves that?
Well, the terrorists are they usually have Israeli flag pins on their lapels. Israel's the terrorist here, not Hamas. I give credit to the current head of the Israeli Defense Forces, or the Israeli Occupation Forces, for being at least having the courage to speak out against inserting his forces back into Gaza, in particular into Gaza City, because what they're running into is Hamas over the course of the last now 2 years, or 23 months, is becoming more adept and skilled at building ambushes, planting improvised explosive devices that can be detonated when a column of troops rolls by. And Israel's taking more casualties, and at the same time, the number of suicides among reservists is going up. Israel can't sustain this. And what's so horrific about it is they're killing so many Palestinians in the process, or starving them to death. But again, this nightmare can be easily stopped. The countries outside of Israel simply need to put a total embargo. No goods exported to Israel, no goods imported from Israel. Shut Israel down. You shut them down economically, they cannot continue with this madness. But so far, not even Russia, India, or China have been willing to suspend trade and take such strong steps. Maybe they will. I'm not optimistic, though.
Nima, I would add to that. You have this incredible hubris in the IDF. At least that's been my experience with them. And the hubris says, I don't care what you had happened to you in Iraq and Afghanistan, America. It won't happen to us. because we are better than you, and you know we are, and we're going to prove it. So they don't think that the sort of thing that happened to us in Afghanistan and Iraq, with insurgents learning what they can do and what they can do better and better and better and bringing P to bear on you, is possible with them. They're finding out they're not perfect. They're not the military that can stand up to anything, as Larry said. They've been taking more and more casualties as things have developed, particularly around the areas where the humanitarian operation, I hate to use that word because it's anything but, it's a killing operation. And if you've listened to Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar, you know just how grossly horrible these places are. I mean, yeah. I was listening to him the other day, a 242 machine gun. They used it for crowd control. They just fired it into the ranks. You could see the people dropping all around. This is a truck driver who apparently leaned out the window. The three elements are the trucks and the contract, the security and the contract, and then the food people. And he leaned out the window and took some video. You can't do that and continue to not lose people in your own force from suicide, desertion, whatever happens to happen. And at the same time, build the animosity and the staying power within the enemy that you're trying to defeat. They go into Gaza City, they're going to take horrendous casualties. And I think they know that. But I also think there was some apparent, it appeared anyway, awakening in some of the leadership that maybe this wasn't right, what they were doing. And I think there's some people who are actually scratching their consciences in the leadership of the IDF and saying, good Lord, have mercy. Look at what we've done. And look at what we're going to finish up doing here in Ramallah and Gaza City. I'm not so sure I'm in favor of this, not only because I'm going to take horrendous casualties, but also because this is not looking good. And Larry's right. It might be looking so bad that we do finally get enough pressure that Donald Trump, for example, has to do something, and something other than, helping him get them into Egypt and building a hotel there or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you throw the possibility of war with Iran into it. It's an incentive for Netanyahu to go that way because he wants to get out of this mess he's created for himself. And what better way than to deepen and widen the strategic disaster? That's been his modus operandi up to this point. So that it really troubles me that we're leaving him no avenue for exit, really, except elongating the war disastrously.
Larry, British government and the government in Armenia are in a process of signing a strategic partnership. What does the United Kingdom want from Armenia?
A platform from which to launch further attempts to subvert Russia. That's all. But, the Brits, the Brits are like a 90-year-old guy with erectile dysfunction. They keep saying they want to date a bunch of 20-year-olds. Good luck with that. Britain, it's a damn joke anymore, because right now Britain's debt to GDP ratio is about 101 to 100. So I mean, they're spending as much money as they bring in, but their economy is completely stagnant. It's in recession. And yet they want to go meddle about and get involved with Armenia. It's not like Armenia is a source of fuel, petroleum for the UK. And how does the UK get there? This is the United Kingdom has been screwing around in the Caucasus since 1853 at least.
Into the Valley of Death, road to 600.
Yeah. So this is some more of this, what I call Western intelligence fantasy, that we believe we can take these pissant little countries, because that's really what Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan are. Together, the total population of Armenia, Azerbaijan and Georgia. I think Moscow still has more people in Moscow alone than those three countries altogether. Okay. So let's just put it in perspective that these are not powerful countries economically or in terms of manpower. And that if Russia has to turn on them militarily, they'll get squashed like a bug on a windshield when the car is going 80 miles an hour. But nonetheless, the West continues to cajole, fool these people into signing up with the West on a suicide mission. It's really astonishing that they can be, Pashinyan in Armenia can be
Pashinyan,
can be such a dupe. You can be taken in such a way, but it's happening.
I think
I can't resist. I can't resist extending Larry's wonderful sexual metaphor about the British. What they do now, these old men, is they peer through a U.S. provided window as voyeurs watching sex.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So we're at the Richard Show X now, Nima. Adult only. Warning.
I want to, our audience have some questions. I want to ask you, Larry. I think the first goes to you, since you're more familiar with the casualties on the part of Ukrainians. Hear what he or she asked. James, he asked, out of the 1.7 million estimated Ukrainian killed, how many are actually mercenaries or active NATO war tourists? And
I think I've seen the number for the Poles is around 10,000. So when you add in the Colombians, U.S., Brits, Canadians, you may be up around 30,000, maybe more, but it's a significant number. And there is a Telegram channel called Track a Mercenary, which keeps a pretty good list of the number of mercenaries that are being killed. They go off on this military tourism adventure, and they come back. If they're lucky, they come back in a box. Yeah. More often than not, they stay on the battlefield and will become fertilizer for future crops in Ukraine.
Carl, here is the second question. What's the end game with Ukraine and Gaza? It sounds like they're doomed. I think we talk about it, but what would be your response to what is that?
Well, the end game for Ukraine should be, as Sergei Lavrov said, they're neutral. There is no NATO membership whatsoever. Any kind of security guarantees are provided by the UNSC or whatever, where Russia, of course, has a veto. I think he also said in an afterthought that Turkey troops would be welcome, but they're NATO too. So I don't know if that's the case or not. And you have to take him at his word, and you have to settle it on that basis. Ukraine I think it could be ended fairly swiftly, not necessarily on the other side of the line, as it were. That is to say, somebody's got to take care of Zelensky and the Nazis behind him and everything else. But you could end it fairly swiftly if you really had a set and you really were intent on ending it, and you didn't care what the Europeans did. And I think they would back off and not do very much at all. One, because they're economic straits, they don't have a lot of money to do anything with. And two, because the U.S. wouldn't be with them. And they don't seem to want to go anywhere really serious without the U.S. So I don't think it's all that big a challenge to shut it down. It might be a challenge to keep the peace after you've shut it down, because the Ukrainians will disrupt it consistently and constantly. They will disrupt it unless we do get rid of that element in Ukraine that is so much for that sort of situation. And Gaza's hopeless, I think. And we have made it hopeless. We have made it utterly hopeless because we will not back off what we are doing. This is my view with Israel. We are doing what we're doing with Israel, not Israel doing what they're doing with us. If that sounds confusing. They're our tool. We're not their tool. They're our tool. Yes, there are people who are bought and paid for. There's no question about that. That makes it easier and smoother and greases the skids both ways. But Lindsey Graham is right when he says, if they weren't doing it, we'd have to be doing it. Would you rather that be the case? He said that on the floor of the Senate. And that's what I think is the truth.
Yeah.
They have been that since 1948, at least, with a lot of checks and balances in people like Eisenhower, even Reagan, who sold AWACS and F-15s to Saudi Arabia against their wishes. Reagan, who stopped them ultimately in Lebanon. H.W. Bush, who forced them into the peace process and got unelected because AIPAC threw its support behind Bill Clinton. Thank you very much. I now think that Ross Perot was working for the Jewish lobby when he threw his hat in the ring and took 5% of the vote from H.W. Bush. That's how angry they got at H.W. Bush. Ever since then, every president has been complicit, but complicit because, as Dick Cheney said, they're doing God's work. And by God, he meant the United States of America.
Yeah. Larry, here is what's going on in Venezuela.
Venezuela. I think she meant Venezuela, right?
Venezuela. She wanted this. Yeah. What's going on in Venezuela? Will China stop those American warships targeting Venezuela?
No. China's not going to do anything militarily there. They'll let the United States set themselves on fire, and then they'll go buy a box of popcorn and sit down and watch as the United States tries to put the fire out by hitting itself in the head with a hammer. So, this, I'm sure the Chinese are sitting around probably saying, could the Americans be this stupid? And no. They wouldn't do that. And then finally, but one of those Chinese guys or gals are going to be vindicated and say, see, I told you they were morons. Yeah, I mean, it's just like the other day you saw Trump say, 600,000 visas for Chinese students. Yeah, let's get them out there. Why did he do that? Well, the reason he did that is because earlier in the year when they were imposing restrictions on foreign students, that was targeted at China. And guess what? Those 600,000 Chinese students, when they attend an American college or university, they pay full tuition.
Yeah.
They are a money center for these academic institutions. There's a great YouTube channel called Inside China Business by an American, Kevin Walmsley, who's been operating there for 15 years, but his YouTube channel has been up since May of 24. He's done at least 2 different shows on this with respect to the Chinese have not only by them not attending these universities, there are at least 30 to 40 American colleges and universities are going to shut down because of the economic loss. That's why Trump did this reversal. The lobbyists, the K-Straight lobbyists working for those colleges and universities went and say, oh, Mr. President, you're killing us here. So
they all descended on us after 9/11, Nima. I mean, we had the University of Texas president, we had Cal State, we had all manner of people descended on us because we revoked all the student visas.
Yeah. So this is so the Venezuela thing is just it's a distraction, and if Trump's dumb enough to go down that rabbit hole, hey. It'll accelerate the end of his presidency. That's all.
Sun Tzu must have said somewhere, Nima, that if your enemy is stupid, let him be so.
Yeah.
China is just, in my opinion, enjoying what's going on with the United States. And
they're trying to figure out what the hell we're doing. So.
Yeah.
Why did Putin not anticipate the Western by removing their $300 billion trust funds before commencing the military conflict in Ukraine?
That's actually a good question. I would guess that because it is what it is, there's such mutual backrubbing in that business that no one thought it would come to this. And so they didn't want to take the money out of what were remunerative assets. That'd be my guess. I mean, let's face it. We run Doha, Tel Aviv, and New York City run the greatest money laundering operations on the face of the earth, about half of which are illicit. And it's not just BCCI, it's banks that you and I both know the names of.
Thank you so much, Carl and Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Hey, well, apart from the usual enjoyment, the fact that it was a sartorial event of great splendor elevated the discussion.
This makes me think back again to the Tailor of Panama. You know, he was so fastidious with all that stuff.
Yeah.
He'd hate this though, probably. Braithwaite would not like it.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
great to be with you guys.
You too.
See you soon.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye-bye.